Well, firstly, can I very much welcome you here this evening. It's very nice of you to come, and thank you to the Royal United Services Institute for use of their very splendid library. I'm instructed on fate of death of telling you that the hashtag for this evening is WFI12. And for those of you who enjoy that kind of thing, that's the code which will lead you into a better existence. I don't know what relationship it has with the genome, but I'm sure there is some secret code in there which is very significant. All of you know, because you've been at our previous events, that this is a follow-on from the set of events we had, the Westminster Faith Debates, which were organised by the Religion and Society Research Programme, funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council and the Economic and Social Research Council, organised from Lancaster University and directed by Professor Linda Woodhead. And we had 7 events which were extremely successful, organised by Peter and Rebecca, who've been tremendously important again in making this happen in an effective way. And I firstly just have to say the record of those first events is in this publication, which some of you may have been able to pick up when you came in. But it's all on our website, and there are videos there if you want to see a record of what those events were. We were exceptionally pleased by the response. I think overwhelmed is the answer. There were a large number of people who came and were involved, more so than we expected, and we had really some very, very warm and generous responses afterwards about the success of the events. And I should say the research councils too were very pleased with the events and felt it was a good example of trying to bring a particular research programme into dialogue with the wider world, which is an important aspect of what they are trying to achieve. So we've decided to follow up in a number of respects. Firstly, I should say, for the future, we are organising a second set of Westminster Faith Debates, which will be publicised on the website later this year, and will take place 4 before Easter and 2 after Easter next year. And they will be in a similar format to the previous debates, and they will be addressing some of the difficult issues of life. How do you deal with birth, death, marriage, and so on over that period? I hope when you see that on the website, you'll be interested in participating in those events. But we also thought an extremely important event, the way of doing what we were trying to do, was to have a series of Westminster Faith interviews. And this is the first of those. It is a rather experimental event. We don't quite know whether it'll work, whether you'll enjoy it, whether our participants will enjoy it. But we've invited John Sulston, who I'll introduce in just a second, Shirley Williams and Delia Smith to be the first 3 this year to talk about how their own faith has driven and informed their work at an immensely high level in all cases. And if this works, we'll think about doing that again next year with a set of people again to see how it goes. It's a slightly experimental thing, and I'll be interested to have any feedback from you afterwards about how this has gone. We're absolutely honoured this evening to have Professor John Sulston, who's right at the on my right just there. He's a Fellow of the Royal Society, a biologist. He won the 2002 Nobel Prize in Physiology of Medicine. I'm instructed by him to say categorically that his Nobel Prize is absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the genome, which I hope is... but on the other hand, I can't pronounce what it is about, and so I can't give you more information than I've just given you. But he's really is one of the most distinguished scientists in this country. He played a central role. He was made director of the Sanger Centre, and now called the Wellcome Trust Sanger Institute, and has worked immensely hard on the process of looking at the genome and seeing how that develops in various ways. So it's absolutely fundamental to the way in which we consider life in various ways. He's now a leading campaigner, amongst other things, against the patenting of human genetic information. And as far as his faith is concerned, he's a very distinguished supporter of the British Humanist Association, and in 2003 was one of 21 Nobel laureates who signed the Humanist Manifesto, and that's been, I think, a driving part of his life. We're very fortunate that Andrew Brown, in the middle here, has agreed to interview John. Andrew is a journalist and writer. I'm sure many of you will have read what he's written in The Guardian and previously sometimes in The Independent. He's written a number of books, including ones very significantly about the relationship between science and religion. And he tried in his book, The Darwin Wars, to explore the significance of evolutionary theory on attempts to understand the human condition, including areas which were once exclusively the domain of religion. He's an ideal person to explore these questions with John. And the format this evening is we're going to ask Andrew to interview John for about 25 minutes, half an hour, something like that. And then I will chair a discussion with the body of the meeting, to which both Andrew and John will respond in whatever way they think fit to the conversation. So that's how we're going to proceed this evening. And I'm going to ask Andrew to be kind enough to kick us off.
Well, I think that I want to say first that I knew you when I was writing. I got to know you when I was writing a book about the work that actually got you the Nobel Prize and how this led quite sideways into the genome, so to say. And though it sounds an odd thing to say, when you won it, I thought this was more of a tribute to your character than your intellect. In the sense that there are lots of very clever people who accomplish a great deal less than you have done. And one of the things that to me is most striking about your character is that the very short distance between what you think you ought to do and you're actually doing it. Most people have their ideals up here and their actions over here somewhere. With you, they're much more like this. And this tends to be something that religious people think of as their own private domain, but you're not. Your father, though, was an army chaplain. So why did you reject his beliefs?
Yes, it's a hard word, but it's the correct word to say reject. It was the tough thing that I had to do during my late teens, was to actually bring out into the open. It's a coming out. You know, it really was a coming out. And the extraordinary thing was when I got to Cambridge, having sort of got through that, having made the decision, but still uneasy about it, and we were talking, late into the night about everything we as students do. When I told people about this, they said, "And so what?" Because they hadn't had that experience. So you're quite right. It was a very special thing. I mean, I think everybody has to break from their parents in one way or another, and that was the most crucial thing that I had to do. Why? Well, that, I think, is one of the things we need to discuss at greater length. I can list perhaps the sorts of reasons. Is that what you would like me to do at this stage already? Dive in. Yes, okay. These are small points compared with the big ones. But as far as I was concerned, I tried very hard. I really did. I was encouraged. I was part of the Anglican Church. This is my father would celebrate communion on Sundays. I became a server at the altar, and I participated in the youth club, and so on and so on. And then I began to question. I began to ask. I said, I suppose one of the earliest things, really, and perhaps the easiest, central one, is to say, why this religion? Why are we Anglicans rather than Catholics or Methodists? Why, indeed, are we Christians? What about these other people who have other faiths, other gods? And the more I learned, of course, the more I realized that there was something different here and one could not have faith. And this, I think, is quite central to the thing you're discussing here. You use the word faith, and each of you means something different by it, I think. And I realized that I could not choose. If I really stepped back from what my father was saying and living, I couldn't choose. I couldn't say, yes, I have faith in that. Not anymore. Even though I tried very hard and had experienced it in a certain way. The sense of Good Friday, for example. Keeping vigil on Good Friday. I immersed myself in that. And then I had to come out of it and say, I'm sorry. There's other people who have other views about this day, and they're just as valid. So I think we can go on to other points, but that's the central one. And for me, at the time, But I think the other one, which I may as well introduce, and this does need a longer discussion, is coming to the realization that you did not have to have faith to be, as you might say, good or moral or something like that. I began to realize that it was not necessary.
Had that been an assumption at your childhood?
Well, I think it does come together, doesn't it? I mean, people in a parish tend to think of themselves as being Christian. We use the word Christian, you know, the Christian act and so on. Actually, they're not talking about Christianity at all. They're talking about the Golden Rule. And I would love to come on and we should discuss this more about where things come from. They're really talking about the Golden Rule. And nobody, not Christians, not Hindus, not humanists, nobody can appropriate the Golden Rule to their own particular lifestyle. It's something that we all share. And I realized that therefore that the Christianity was not essential for that. And again, it meant there wasn't the sort of need to hang on for that particular reason.
I wanted to jump straight off the tracks here. You say that nobody can appropriate the Golden Rule. This is quite true. But what's striking is large numbers of people abandon it. I mean, you're sitting on this commission studying population and resources, where perhaps your whole problem is that the Golden Rule is not something that the rich countries want to follow. So how do you get round that? I mean, religions seem to me to provide reasons, if not logical ones, reasons of feeling, reasons of belonging for subscribing to the Golden Rule. What do you do without them?
It's very important. And I think we need to go back. We really do need to step back, as I did as a teenager, but step back further and step back in time and ask, where did religions come from? And it seems to me that far and away the best explanation we have of religion is that we are social animals and we are pack animals. It is our nature to be pro-social, and it's our nature to look for strong leaders of one kind or another. Religion, any religion, supplies both of these requirements. But why were we selected for this pro-social behavior, which is the Golden Rule is a very convenient shorthand for, is pro-social behavior? Well, because of that. We are evolved in a way where anybody who stepped outside that for any length of time would perish. Somebody who leaves the society cannot exist on their own. We are social animals. And this is enormous strength. And we see it. You can bring this right up to date. You know, this is not something which is just for history. It comes out of our history, I think. There's lots of evidence for that. But we bring it right up to date in the way we act. The strength of what we're doing now, of communicating, the knowledge that we share, the knowledge that we don't share, more importantly, which gives us something to talk about, the way it's being recorded, the way we're all here together, we are acting in an extremely collective social way. We're doing something that no one of us could do alone. So I see religion as being the secondary thing and the Golden Rule, the pro-social behavior, as being the primary thing. Now, this is the question I want to ask you, and I really want us to explore, because I think it's enormously important. We're at a very critical time, as you indicate, in human history. Is religion helpful? If so, which religion? Is it all religions? Because clearly we have quite a lot. Look at America right now. We do not see religion in any way as bringing people together into a more social way. I would think we are more social here in a secular way than America is in a Christian way. But I just picked that one example. We cannot argue this on anecdotes. It's just to illustrate the way I'm thinking about it. It's not obvious to me that we do want to go further into religion, but rather recognize where religion comes from and recognize the crucial importance of social behavior in the future, cooperative behavior. As you indicate, we've got to go more towards the Golden Rule, less greed. We've got to share the resources of the earth, or we shall all perish.
Now, where I'd want to come back to you about that is the idea that you can strip the Golden Rule away from the stories, from the understandings, and the rituals even that it's embedded in. If you look at what sociologists of religion actually believe about the way it works, it's not terribly different to what you say, but it does cast a much greater... for one thing, Robert Bellah will talk a lot about the ways in which religion will model both dominance and the rebellion against dominance, how they have strong egalitarian strains. We know this in Christianity. You know, you can find very radical forms of Christianity, as well as all the prostration before the Lord stuff. But there is also the very deep and important role of emotion, of ritual, of pre-intellectual thought and processing, which makes these arguments seem compelling. What it seems to me, the difficulty I have with deracinated rationalism, of which I'm not accusing you, because as I said at the start, you're entirely integral in that way, is that it doesn't supply reasons for people who don't feel the morality that you do. Religion seems to me, apart from anything else, a way of spreading moral feeling.
What I think, if I understand rightly, what you're arguing is that it enlarges the scope. Now, without religion at all,
extent, yes.
we certainly have the family loyalty. And of course, that's where these things come from in human prehistory. We're quite clear that it's the group, the tribe, which is you do as you would be done by, because otherwise you would be lost.
Or indeed
you'd be excluded.
You'd be excluded. You'd get done. But remember that one of the first and most influential theories of religion is Durkheim's, which simply says this is the way we understand our society. That societies are constituted by their religious understandings of themselves. And I used to say snarkily when I lived in Sweden that this is a theocracy organized about the worship of itself. It wasn't. It did seem to me that societies are based on values which can be called sacred even when they have no supernatural underpinning.
Well,
how do you prove that human rights exist, for example? We both believe in them, we're absolutely certain, but if you've got somebody coming around saying, well, where's your evidence that human rights exist? You know, what is this nonsense? Nobody had even heard of it 200 years ago. Okay. How can we answer
I think the rights are just an elaboration. So what we're doing, we take the basic golden rule, a simple moral code, pro-sociality, and we elaborate it. But of course, coming back to your point about different things being sacred, I mean, the understanding of the world around us has been elaborated in all sorts of ways. When you go to when you go to the centre of Australia and see this enormous rock which is venerated, that's a sacred object. And you have special trees in North America which are venerated and so on. So people obviously do adduce sacred feelings or sacred justification somehow, and it undoubtedly would provide a drawing together. I think you have to ask whether this is really helpful or appropriate, really, objectively. Now, of course, people must do what they want. I have nothing against people having any belief they like, but it must not get in the way of the overall actions of society that take us forward. But let me just come back to thinking about the scope thing, because I think that's rather important. Mm. It's very clear that there would be no humans in existence if you didn't have family loyalty. I mean, just parental care is part of it, but also sideways caring and so on. Gives people everything they need to take them through life, and that extends out to the larger unit. And there's quite a strong body, rather frightening body of opinion that extends it to genetic equality. I'm always terrified when I come across this, and people say, well, of course, you can obviously run a society which is genetically homogeneous, but you know, things fall apart when you're not. I don't think this is true, because I think we actually, more and more, it's our cultural connections that matter. But we do have to be wary of that. People do find it easy to cooperate if they had a long history, and the genetics will go with that. So it's probably quite hard to disentangle. We also can see it quite readily stretching out to the boundaries of the nation state. And although in general this brings religion with it, and as I say, America and our own leaders, I don't think we have anybody in government who doesn't sort of at least give lip service to having belief. I don't think it's necessary. The sense of national identity is more powerful. And of course, we do very successfully bring people with quite different belief structures into our nation and get very, total loyalty for the doings of the state. It seems to me that the brink, the precipice, if we don't get it right, that we're standing on the edge of, is how nation states deal with each other. And so can we extend this golden rule out to embrace all of humanity? And of course, that's exactly what our People and the Planet report is about. And we're not making a good fist of it at the moment. All we hear from our government, or the Americans here, or anybody hears from their government, is we have to outcompete the others.
Yep.
And this will not work. We're going to perish if we do that.
I wouldn't argue with that. I just want to open an awful abyss underneath the fundamentals of this argument. As you say, we're very social beings. We have evolved that way. And it follows from the logic of evolution that we've evolved that way because those who were less social died, left fewer descendants. We are nice guys because nice guys finish first. And so you would expect our niceness to have limits. You'd expect us to have a dual aspect, that our friendliness, our pro-sociality is balanced by our anti-sociality,
and of course
our collective anti-sociality.
It's not just pro-social, we do have that balance.
Yes, and here we are sitting a very short distance from the cenotaph, which is an absolutely wonderful example of tremendous pro-sociality and self-sacrifice in the interests of doing the other bastards down. And I really don't know. I mean, it seems to me that the problem of enlarging the sphere of sympathy is, despite everything, a religious one, simply because reason doesn't get us far enough.
I would think it's exactly the opposite, Andrew. I really would, because when you look at what's going on with religion...
I mean, I used to agree with you. But
that's fine. By the end of the evening, you'll be agreeing with me again. But really, when you look objectively, just step back and look objectively at the divisions between nations. Yes. Are they more often helped, or I mean, are they more often increased or decreased by religion? I mean, for heaven's sake, we had the last American president who went around saying it was a war between Christianity and Islam.
Well, actually, he didn't. He wanted to say it, but he was very careful not to.
But that was the sentiment, wasn't it? And of course, there are people who feel that way, and I think that it's not obvious that religion will help us. We do not need religion, I would submit, to bind us together in nation states. And so the big question is how we go beyond the nation state and how we get international cooperation. And I see secular activities as doing that at least as well as religion, though I see no objection to using religion if it's helpful.
But which particular secular activities? I mean, before the First World War, there was this lovely theory that we were also interlocked with trade and with the clear benefits of peace, that we could never go to war. A very clever man called Norman Angell wrote a book to that effect.
And in limited areas, it works very well, free trade areas, and Europe is one. Europe hasn't started World War III, well, not yet.
Yeah, but it's not just because of free trade, it's also because of our quite sobering experiences of the first two times.
Well, it is actually, though, I think the common market was pretty important, don't you? Yeah. I mean, trading is a really good thing to do, and for that reason, although, as you indicated in the introduction about my feeling about patenting genes or whatever, which is somewhat bound up with some of these issues, I welcome that people are going in and investing in China, for example. I think it's extremely valuable in terms of world peace. We do have to translate that into something more, which is dealing with limited resources. But if we can do that, then it's not a bad basis. So I'm afraid I would say yes, that's far more useful than having the same religion. Is having the same trading arrangements.
I think I think you probably need both, and it's no use saying the same religion because people won't. I mean, anybody who says we need a world religion is embarked on some doomed program of world conquest.
So you have the Council of Churches, yes, sure. I mean, you can, but I mean, I just don't see it as terribly relevant compared with the other things that are going on.
All right, can I come?
Yeah.
Can I come back to this defence, as it were? Let's assume, which is not, I think, controversial, that if we want to come to a coherent and sensible way of living within the planet's means, you and I and everybody here are going to give up quite a lot so that the rest of the world gets a reasonable amount, gets the minimum they need. Now, what I don't understand, and you must be up against this all the time, is what kind of arguments can we put to the rich to say, be fair? If you don't say, you have a duty. If you don't say, this proceeds from something that just is.
One of the quotes two quotes I treasure from Bill Gates. Number one is when he was asked whether he or Apple were going to dominate. He said, we will. And he was asked why. He said, because I have infinite greed. The major requirement to become the richest guy in the world. The second quote, which is just as good, is that when challenged when he began the Gates Foundation, or his father, the rest of it, the family business, family marvelous philanthropy, which is the major driving force between global health right now, something that all of us, Democrats and governments and everybody, should be ashamed of, but we depend on this one American philanthropist, or two now, who mostly do the important things surrounding global health. When asked why, if he was so keen to get so terribly, how it made sense that he was now giving away what he'd worked so hard to achieve, and why was he happy to get so rich, he said, well, they shouldn't have let me. So he was expressing in those two little quotes, he was expressing the view that society perhaps should be even run on more egalitarian lines, and this seems to me the root of the matter. Inequality begins at home, if you like, and therefore the opposite begins at home. It's a truism, as you know, that let's be quite parochial about it. This is where we live. We live in the UK. The inequality at the beginning of the 20th century was up, and if we measure it on a particular scale of top and bottom 10% or something of the incomes, then I think we had a factor of about 10 to 15 at the beginning of the century. That dropped, and by the 60s, which I'm a child of the 60s, so I adore the age, you had the lowest level of inequality in this country, and since then it's climbed up, starting with Thatcher ideology and on from there, it's climbed up to be more or less where it was at the beginning of the 20th century. Now, this is the reason why people are not willing to share, why, as you say, the golden rule is being broken all the time. Of course it is. If you run an unjust, unequal society where you have people with the bonuses, a mile away from here and all the rest of it, people are fed up, and they're right to be fed up. And they respond in various ways, but they certainly are not going to be terribly willing to share with others in the world. So I think I'm not solving the point, but I'm saying it's not just about getting the rich to cough up. It's about realizing that we need to change not only the world's society in some way, but our own society in order to make this work. And of course in Europe, being sort of more or less social democratic, we have a strong position. And this is what Europe ought to be doing, and it's tragic that the UK is not playing a larger part in Europe. Europe ought to be driving the cause of social democracy, driving equality against those who would like to not follow this way. We would then have a much more powerful position to push out and get everything shared.
Well, I mean, again, I want to agree with you here. But because I spent some years living in Sweden at the end of social democracy, and after I left it, though I'd like to think the two facts are not concerned, not connected, its measure of inequality shot up faster than anywhere else in the world.
Absolutely, it's very sad, isn't it?
Which is quite extraordinary. Mm-hmm. Something should have stopped that, and it didn't. And something changed in the 60s. When we were talking earlier in the green room, there's this lovely story of you arguing in Cambridge back in the early 70s that as scientists you shouldn't be paid any more than dustmen because they were just as useful and you had a whole lot more fun in your job. Now, my question is, when did that sort of argument stop being taken seriously even as an ideal? And if we haven't got an answer to that, then we have a terrible hole in the rationalist picture of the world.
I mean, it's not gone away entirely at all. And actually, obviously, the last sort of intervention I made a couple of minutes ago, it was expressed in very idealistic terms. You're quite right to say, well, so what? What do we do? I say, look at the young. The young come as idealists. The young come as pro-social, very, very largely. Much more so than the old guys who are running the place. So what goes wrong during a person's life? What goes wrong that society expresses the most aggressive competitive ideals to, not the exclusion of, but to insufficiency of the pro-social ones? Look at the policies that we're conducting now, and I guess we shouldn't be party political, but nevertheless it's important. I'm now having to volunteer a bit at my local library because funding has been withdrawn to a great extent. This is a ridiculous thing to cut. Imagine cutting public library systems. We have people fighting for the survival of old libraries in London. These are crucial underpinnings of society, and yet the choice has been to allow the rich to get richer instead. And I'm not at all clear that this is really the democratic choice of the British people, and it's certainly not the democratic choice of the young. There's loads and loads of very intense interest in globalization, not to do with religion, but to do with the people the young people who feel they're world citizens, as I did and still do. And so I think it's somewhere in here that we should look. So it's the way we structure society, and in order to get out of it, we can't do it just by leaving it to democracy. It needs very intense leadership of some kind, of people who, you know, start to offer different kinds of view, and people are trying, but they've got to go on trying and offer a different framework.
But John, you see what you're saying, that democracy on its own is not enough. We need people offering a different intellectual take and a better moral take on the whole thing. Is mutatis mutandis exactly what I could hear from a Catholic bishop? They might disagree.
Some Catholic bishops.
Yes, well, they might disagree about what particular sorts of morality, and I didn't mean to open up a great swamp of sex over to the side of that.
Be careful, yes, right.
Let's stick to social teaching.
Stick to social.
But as I say, this is what fascinates me. It seems to me that your position is one, in all its essence, religious, and you think it's completely irreligious, and I wish we could get more closely what it is that you think you have successfully rejected about all religion.
God. We're talking about theism. Now, this is very interesting. Yes. Andrew sent me, well, you wrote a blog, which was one thing, where you very nicely trailed this meeting tonight, but you also wrote an email, and between those two, and I can't remember what was in each, but you extend the concept of religion. Now, I actually, as a result of one of those, I can't remember which it was, I went back to see what the OED defines religion as, and it says that it's, I wrote it down because I thought it was quite important, that religion has to do with looking to a higher power. I have it here. Yes, recognition of a higher unseen power. This is the main definition. Mm-hmm. Having control of destiny, entitled to obedience, reverence, worship, and thereby leading towards moral attitudes. Now that's your argument, but the point is the higher power is in there. Now what I'm saying, and the reason for the rather lengthy introduction about the golden rule and our prehistory, is that that's what came first, and people have added in the higher power, very often for their own ends. I mean, after all, it's you know, the religious powers got filthy rich out of running their churches, so they had a very good reason for promoting religion, but that was not what was there in the first place. So all I'm doing is to say I am a follower of the golden rule, but I'm not a theist. It's as simple as that. And we must, as you say, avoid the word religion, I think, because it's used in other ways now as well.
Yes, no, I really don't think, I distinguish quite sharply between theism and religion in that sense.
Yeah.
I can see that.
And religion, it's an older use, actually, which the Oxford says is obsolete, which is devotion to some principle, and it was used that way, I think, a few hundred years ago, and it's fair enough, you can revive that use. But if we call it theism, the thing which I'm talking about, and you say I've rejected, yes, indeed I have, because I explained why there were many gods and I couldn't choose among them, and also because I understood, and it's extremely important that we have the theory of evolution. I know you've written more about this, lots about this, and know much more about it than I do, but it is extremely important to understand in oneself that it is reasonable for us to have got where we are without a direction. May I just ask, how many people here sort of feel comfortable with the idea of religion? I don't mean comfortable in an emotional sense. I mean, are you inside its skin? Do you understand how evolution works? Is there anybody who doesn't, really? No, they won't own up. All right, you all understand how evolution works. Well, but it's so important. I mean, I didn't understand until I was a postdoc in California, which is about my mid-20s, really.
Is this a good point to throw it open to the...
Sorry, I seem to have done that already.
No, does that work? No, it's perfectly right. You obviously take over things just the way things should be. However, I'm going to abuse my role by just asking you one further question which relates to what you've started out. I was very interested when you described your own path in your late teens and then at university, because I went through a similar process myself, though without having religion in my history. And you said the key question which came to you was, why this religion? For me, the key question was, I couldn't come to believe in something called a God. People had all kinds of discussions about how I had values, the golden rule, whatever. But I just couldn't myself accept that there was a concept of a God that I could say, yes, I'm with that. And I would answer your why this religion question by saying that that's a culturally formed question, that people are different religions because they happen to come from different histories and different circumstances, rather than a rational choice between particular religions and so on. But my big question wasn't your big question, why this religion. It was actually, I can't myself come to accept the idea that there is such a thing as a God. And I just wondered why that hadn't been your thought, particularly given the last conversation which Andrew drew from you, where clearly that was a very important factor in your thinking.
When I introduced the point, I was saying this is in a way trivial, but it was my history. And this was the key thing which I could present and say, look, I can't continue with your faith because of this. But I absolutely agree. I mean, that's why I brought the thing to theism that I see now, and that's why I just introduced evolution, because that actually did, and I think for many people, made us realise that we didn't have to believe in a God anymore.
Because there was another explanation of how we are where we are.
That we are random products of mutation and recombination of our genomes, which didn't have to lead where we are now. And this, by the way, is why this is so important. We talked about the crux that we're at in terms of the Earth's resources, and that is very, very important, because otherwise we shall perish. But there's also the crux we're at. Having got to this point of understanding, and I think I would single out cosmology and evolution as being the two key steps, that we actually have a pretty clear understanding of where we are, but also tremendously exciting of where we can go. You know, we are not limited in what we can do collectively, so long as we don't blow it. And that seems to me a really wonderful future, and it's simply an exploration. I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know how much we can understand or what we can do, but I'm quite certain we can understand far, far more than we do at the moment, and we can also travel, we can do lots of things in the universe. I'm afraid that looking back, gods have been a terribly poor guide, both how the universe is and what we can do. At every step, the gods have tried to hold us back because they were simply the expression of vested interests in their individual societies.
Well, that should provoke questions, if nothing else does. Firstly, just to thank both John and Andrew for that really fascinating exchange. I'm now going to throw it open. Just to remind you, we are being recorded. We have colleagues with mics, but could you give your name and, if relevant, any particular affiliation before you ask your question? I think I can see from already a number of hands going up. I'm going to take them in groups of 3 and then ask Andrew or John to respond. But please feel free to either focus your question or just ask it in general. First, the gentleman over there with glasses. Yes, you.
Yes, my name is Bjarne Nørum from the Danish newspaper Kristeligt Dagblad. I'll just go back to the very question about this debate and ask the professor what role does religion have to play?
Okay, gentleman at the back right there.
My name is Brian Pierce. I'd just like to say I think we have a difficult evening if we have to try to arrive at a common definition of what we mean by religion, or for that matter what we mean by theism. And I think perhaps we have to try to use a shared vocabulary. And I'd like to pick up on Sir John's statement towards the end of what he said, where he said we are not limited. I think we are limited because I think that the evolutionary process exhibits a mix of chance, random mutation, and necessity, because we live within a universe which imposes its own limits. And those limits are relevant to what it turns out we can experience in terms of human flourishing. And I think the discussion that was going on was really about how do we establish a foundation for the sense of ought, as opposed to we human beings have just come along, we had an interesting chat, and we decided we would adopt these values. Because the values that we need to adopt emerge from the human condition and the human experience. Now, there is still a problem about how we ensure that we live in terms of an ought, and we need to discuss that together. And obviously different religious traditions actually, in today's world, have established a considerable degree of common ground, of which the Golden Rule is an obviously good example, and which is shared with people who do not call themselves religious. And I think we need to have, as it were, a human consensus about what constitutes human flourishing and how we secure it.
Thank you. There. Yep. Just there, just in front of you there, please. Thank you.
So James Kidner from Coexist. It's been an interesting discussion, though I'm privately frustrated that we've had more on library closures and tax policy than we have on worms and genomes and areas of your speciality. But I want to throw Robert Putnam into this debate and his research that seemed to demonstrate that, in his summary, that religious people are nicer, that collectively they give more to charity, they help more little old ladies across the road, they give blood more, they volunteer more. Underpinning all that is a general sense that somehow the world is better for the presence of these religions, however benighted the beliefs that underpin them may be. Can you sort of tackle that difficulty of what I might call social policy meeting religious attitude?
Thank you. That's 3. John, would you like to have a stab?
So the first question, what role does religion play? I think we should just let that emerge as we go forward. I mean, we've already been discussing it. So let's go on to the next one, which is part of the answer to that. So are we limited? And what constitutes human flourishing? I think, just to enlarge a little on what I finished with before, before we started on the audience points, I see us as on a journey, and that is the good to me. And the important thing is to survive, and, as you absolutely say, to flourish, because there's no point in the journey unless we flourish. And it seems to me that these are core values. They're not in any way limited. We may in the end be limited by the nature of the universe. I mean, there's a sort of enormous speculation, about multiverses, are the physical parameters particular, just the only possibility for us, and that's why we're in this universe and so on. I think many of these things may clarify themselves as we go forward. We are so young. We are so young in our intellect and understanding in the universe. And we have a very long way to go. We should not be worried about where the end point is. We should just be making sure that we journey successfully at the moment. And very importantly, I think, and I'm repeating myself a little bit, but elaborating, we are at a crux in terms of evolution. What brought us here to this point is not what's going to carry us on beyond. That's why these issues are so important. That's why we're here tonight. And religion is just the first step of articulating, if you like. I personally am guessing that we shall shed all this God stuff, this religion stuff. Andrew's not terribly keen on the humanist and philosophy, and admittedly, well, no, but it's fair enough. I mean, I certainly am not.
Over what timescale will we shed it, in your view?
Well, I think in some respects we need to shed it quite fast.
Yeah, how long have we got?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if it does result in increased conflict, then we need to at least dampen it down a lot, and so that it becomes more of a hobby. And less of a sort of driving force. But I just do not see that as being the important thing. And what constitutes human flourishing is that we go on successfully. I'm sorry, I haven't got a note of the last question.
Are religious people, James is stressing that religious people do more good things.
I have tremendous respect for Putnam, but I think these facts are a little contested. I mean, one of the problems is that there's quite a bit of self-reporting about this, about how you feel and what you do. And I understand that there isn't terribly strong evidence that religion makes you more generous in these various ways. It may come up the other way around, that if you have some of those impulses, then you'll join some sort of organization. But I think this is exactly what you see with the Humanist Association, for example. So you do not have to have theism to make that work.
Andrew?
Okay. I want to come back on several points. I mean, first you talk as if theism was some kind of constant category, but actually gods evolve quicker than almost anything else. And you can quite clearly see, even within the Bible, God, there's a wonderful book somewhere called The Absence of God, and the way how he just sort of walks. In the very beginning of the Bible, he's actually walking around in the Garden of Eden. And you get a few books in, and he's completely disappeared. And this is perhaps a more sophisticated version of the idea. But as I say, I don't think theism as such is a natural category. It's a fairly artificial idea that we understand from our background, but it's not necessary to religion. And the way that gods evolve is surely one of the more creative parts of religion. The second question of our limitations. Now, I may be off beam here, but one of the things when I was writing about sociobiology and evolutionary theory, it seemed to me that was discovered in the 60s to some extent when you started applying game theory to the evolution of behavior, was the idea of quite sharp limits. The distinction between in-groups and out-groups and the capacity to be pro and antisocial is part of that. And these limitations, because they're about contests for resources, seem to me built into the universe no matter how we expand. And it's because I see religions as man-made, flexible systems that I expect them to continue. You know, you won't get rid of them. If fanaticism is to your advantage, as in some circumstances it is, then fanaticism will reappear. It's not an intellectual mistake.
Yes, let me just come tangentially back on that before we go on to the next sort of questions. So the reason, and I will just for the moment stick to the more traditional point about religion, because that really does make the distinction that I want. This higher unseen power entitled to obedience, reverence and worship, the difficulty with that is that it removes responsibility from us. And that's what we cannot afford, especially at this point in history. We don't have more space and more resources. We are in conflict with each other over all sorts of stupid things, which we don't need to be. We are not short of food or water or anything else. What we are short of is proper distribution right now. And we shouldn't be, because we ourselves, and this is really the crucial thing about what we've got here, are transcendent thinkers. Not transcendental, transcendent. Think outside the box in management speak. As far as we know, there's no other species that really does this to any extent, although very interestingly we can trace the continuity. It's not that we suddenly got insulated at some point and were magical different divine beings. No. It comes out of the birds and the other primates and so on. You can see them. But we do it in a way which is so much better, that we do it across time, across space, across generations. We are transcendent thinkings. We know what we're doing. We know what's happening. What's missing, and I do not know whether theist religions or atheist religions or whatever you may call it, maybe according to your definition it's sufficiently broad that of course yes it's going to be religion, but I just don't think it helps to sort of say everything is a religion. But in some way or another we have to reflect that transcendent thinking that everybody's capable of back into more responsible collective behaviour. And believing in an unseen higher power is not going to help that, because it allows you to escape, and you end up with the old thing about people, you know, making loads of money, cheating other people during the week, and going to church on Sunday if you're not very careful.
But surely
I'm going to open it just a bit to the group, because there were a number of people who had hands up.
Sorry, yeah.
I've got the gentleman in the back who's follically challenged, like me. The gentleman with glasses just over there, and the gentleman in the middle. I'll take those three. Yes, please.
Hello, my name's Yanni. I'm a member of the public. I wrote my question down. I just wanted to say that I'm of the opinion that secular and scientific progress represents a unidirectional erosion of religion's authority on any aspect of our observable reality, and that we will at some point reach a stage where all that's left for religion are the points of unfalsifiability, things that by definition are impossible to prove or disprove. My question is, we all know things that at one point religion provided the best explanation for, until science and evidence came along and provided a more satisfying explanation. I was wondering if either of the speakers know of any aspect of society or any question or issue that at one point started off with reason and logic at its core, and then religion comes along and provides a better explanation.
Okay. Second.
Well,
hang on, just before we start, I'm going to take a group of three.
Bernard Silverman. Now, I'm going to start with a story, which is John and I used to sit next to each other at the Council of the Royal Society, and we don't hold the same religious position. But the Royal Society was trying to produce a statement about evolution, and John and I both got quite agitated because we wanted the Royal Society to say, and we still do want it to say, I think, that evolution is a fact. It is, isn't it, John? And yes, thank you. And all they would say was something like it was scientifically verified as far as we could tell. But John and I both think it's a fact. So I'll start from that position, and now I'll ask John this question. I think you've slipped from saying that theism isn't necessary to saying it's clearly false, because I sensed your description of your emotional journey, which I recognise but don't share, as being that you always thought God was necessary, and then you realised that evolution explained it all, and therefore God wasn't necessary, and because God wasn't necessary, God wasn't there. And that actually is also relevant to the previous question. So is this a description or a reflection of your own thought processes, or is it, if you like, an argument that you'd like all of us to sign up to? So, and just as you would like us, correctly in my view, to sign up to evolution being a fact.
Thank you. The final one in this round is the gentleman there. The mic's just coming along. Excuse me, could you just pass the mic along to him? Thank you. Thanks.
I'm Alan Hayes. I'm a humanist. I'm the director of Leicester Secular Society, which is the oldest in the world. I've been very interested to see the development of evolution as it moves from biological evolution to the evolution of societies. The number of publications about the importance of the development of cooperation in human societies recently has been quite striking. And it seems to me that one thing that's going on is that we are finally beginning to understand how religions work. And this is crucial. And I'd like to see a great deal more of it. The religions seem to provide a narrative that people want to join into. And this is an important aspect when it comes to the use of stories. I see no reason why the morally significant stories from religions should not be taken up by a non-theistic view of life. And one of my objectives when I go into schools is to get children to be proud of being human beings. I'll stop there. I could go on a long time.
Thank you very much. John first.
I think I need to go on thinking about whether there's any point where religion has taken over from scientific explanation. Let me answer a different question along the same lines, whether there's going to be another big point. I mentioned cosmology and getting to grips with evolution as being two key things. I would say the one that's going to challenge us in terms of scientific progress most, in terms of the discovery process, is understanding this. That is tough. That is very, very tough, because it will mean we really are faced probably with all kinds of moral dilemmas having to do with free will and so on, which at the moment we can sort of brush away and say, we don't really know what's going on in there. I do this. I mean, it's not going to be something that's going to challenge in my lifetime. I'm not sure about, but I can't think of any point where religion has given a better explanation or more satisfying explanation than science. Bernard's point, yes, no, absolutely. I mean, I hope I didn't come across in my factual account of my own story that I can disprove the existence of God. Of course, I would not say that. I do, however, stick to the point of the explanations I've tried to give, that I, along with many other people, have realized that belief in a higher power was no longer necessary in the light of some of these explanations. But I would stick, however, to the point I made about responsibility. I think there's a great danger in the belief in the higher power if it allows you to absolve it to any degree whatever responsibility, and that I think we should continue to pursue.
What's the difference, John, between a higher power, meaning some theistic or godlike figure, and a scientific theory? Can't people similarly abstract themselves from responsibility by saying science explains that?
This is what's wrong with the word faith. Faith means you're supposed to go on believing this higher power regardless. Whereas the whole point about science, and that's where we had this difficulty, Bernard, wasn't it? Is that people are perfectly right to say that there is no such thing as a scientific fact. What we were saying about evolution is this is a fact just as good as the law of gravity or whatever. And this is, yeah. And it's important because people are misusing this point about evolution, right, to say creationism is just as good and everything's relative. Right? So that was our point. And so that's the whole essence of science, and that's its power, and that's why I so confidently say that we've got a huge future ahead of us, is if we go on exploring in this thoughtful and objective and questioning way, then we're going to find out a huge amount more than we do at the moment. And whether we should tell kids stories about it, well, fine, no, stories are absolutely great, but it just so long as you don't attach dogma to any particular aspect of these stories.
Andrew, would you like to comment on the questions or on what John said?
Well, the challenge to produce anything that religion has done better than... well, actually, what the questioner said was reason and logic, which makes life a whole lot easier, because at a rough list, it seems to me that the abolition of slavery is a perfectly good example of something which was driven by religion, and which, until it happened, I mean, a shift in values, a broadening of sympathy, the classic Wedgwood statue of the slave in chains, am I not a man and a brother? Now, this is not a scientific question. It's a direct appeal to sympathy. And for the preceding, I don't know, how old is slavery? 3,000 or 4,000 years, shall we say? People capable of reason and logic had seen nothing terribly wrong with it. The Greeks saw nothing wrong with it. They were damn certain that it was a very bad thing to be a slave, and you didn't want it to happen to you or to your family, but if it happened to somebody else, well, that's the breaks. And there, I would say, is a clear example where one form of religion improved on the work of unaided reason and logic. I can think of lots of examples going in the other direction, sure.
Was that the question?
Yes, I think it was. It was
yes.
Sorry, I picked out the science bit, but
the science started off, but I don't see. I mean, saying a religious explanation is better than a scientific one seems to, it just sort of makes no sense. You can't balance
well,
the
exactly.
two.
That was my problem. So what you're saying is about sociological change, then a belief structure of some kind may be helpful, or else, which I think you're doing, you're simply defining religion is in this case as sociology or sociology.
Well, no, I'm saying here is a social change which was driven by a particular religious doctrine. I mean, one of the things
of equality or greater equality,
or
really.
Common humanity. Yeah, and one of the things that I come up against again and again in this argument is people talk as if religion were one thing. If you could say religion does this and science or logic or reason does something else, and partly because I've got such a protean idea of religion, and partly because I've actually got quite a collection of examples of different ways in which different religions have worked, I can't do that.
But is it not right that the slave trade was also bolstered for a very long time exactly by religious beliefs?
Oh yes, they adapted themselves, but in the end it was religious beliefs that, I'm not saying, of course they adapted to it. I mean,
my example's a bit different. I mean, in the journey I was referring to earlier, having decided that I wasn't a theist, and I still remain not a theist, but also fairly dismissive through my 20s of the contribution of religion to life, I then started working in urban inner city policy in Hackney in the late 1970s on community engagement, because the issue was how did you regenerate the cities, where rationally there was a very strong argument, of course, for regenerating the cities, but actually it wasn't happening because lots of people were expressing their own interest in various ways. And what I saw in all of the community, or I should say almost all of the community organisations, was driving people who were people of a particular faith, not for a recruiting purpose, but because they saw it as their mission. And in the case of Hackney, which is a very, very multicultural community, they range from evangelical Christians to the new black churches, to Muslims, to Catholics, to Jews, and so on. All of whom, not all of whom, people from all those faiths were committing themselves to social progress and advance, and that made a material difference. Now, of course, there were also people of no faith who were in that position as well, but I certainly, without getting into a weighing discussion of the type James was trying to raise earlier, who did more, I certainly would have to say that I changed my view because I saw that there were a significant number of people motivated by what they saw as their mission, which came from their faith, to work in that kind of constructive way. And some people, I'm not suggesting you, but some people try to reduce that to an attempt to recruit people. So it wasn't about that. It was people living out their set of beliefs. It's a different type of example, and obviously it's not a scientific example, but it nevertheless was an example of something happening which a pure rational approach somehow wasn't generating. It was a different, and that changed my view to take the view that religion can be a force for good, which I've since argued. Sorry, I'm not really supposed to answer any questions. I've got three. 1, 2, I'll take this little corner. It's a dangerous little group. 1, 2, 3. First at the back, and then the front, two front.
I've just been thinking as you're
sorry,
talking.
Can you just give your name?
Ruth Scott, Anglican priest. I've just been thinking that as you're talking, it seems to me that you're talking as though the religious language and scientific language are the same type of languages, and that religious language has become obsolete because it's been replaced by scientific process. And it seems to me that there are two different types of language, that religious language is more the language of the arts than the language of science, and that they are addressing different issues. And I don't see that reflected in what you're saying, and I wonder if you could comment on that.
And then the gentleman directly in front of you.
This question might play into that last question quite well. Early on,
Sorry, again, could you just give your identification?
Sorry, I'm Bob Churchill from the International Humanist and Ethical Union. Andrew framed a question early on about the use of stories of a religious nature for expanding the sort of scope of our moral questions, and John's answer came very much in sort of terms of, well, we can use reason as well, and there are secular institutions that play a more important role. Another response to that came from the gentleman earlier, sort of saying, well, we don't have to give up on religious stories anyway. But I think it would be a great shame and a sort of paucity of imagination not to also think about the very secular and humanist nature of much literature, not just now, but over a very long time, that offers a very humanist conception of moral universality, empathy, that is in no way relying on the sort of mythology of religion.
Examples?
I think my favourite novel that that gives me a sense of, I suppose, fragility of humanity is The Songs of Distant Earth by Arthur C. Clarke, which is a science fiction novel, so lots of people will disagree with my taste there, but it's about it's about a future colony deep in space after the destruction of the Earth and being visited by people on sort of subsequent colony ships. So there's a real sense of sort of pathos of what is lost, of what humanity was and has now become, and individual human life and its sort of tender link to the past. I think Shakespeare is often incredibly humanist. He's not relying on sort of religious prestructs, and just today in general, people have not become immoral because they don't rely for their moral basis on religious stories, even if they're referring to Buffy the Vampire Slayer or something as where they get their background wealth of stories from.
Thank you. And the lady on your left.
I'm Lois Lee. I'm at the University of Kent and in religious studies and work for the Non-Religion and Secularity Research Network. And my question was whether, as a researcher of religion who works in a religious studies department and researches non-religion, you've ended up convincing me that maybe this doesn't matter at all. Where the consensus seemed to lie was in the importance of social democracy and how fundamental that might be to very important issues and a number of issues. And you both seem to agree on that, whilst disagreeing as to whether religion is a negative force or a positive force or so on. So, in a sense, it's talking so much about religion, which I encourage for all sorts of reasons, obviously, not least to keep myself in a job, I suppose. But it's talking about religion for these kind of fundamental issues, a bit of a red herring in the end. Is it helping us with this fundamental issue about social democracy?
Thank you. John again.
I always get to lead after, right?
Oh, well, I'm
very happy to.
I was thinking I was maybe being unfair. Andrew, do you feel you're being cut out?
No, I'm perfectly happy for John to open the batting. I mean, I can't talk too much. People haven't come here to see
John,
me.
and then the interrogation.
Okay, I will.
From,
I'd love to take up that first one, and let me just tell you that I argued vehemently by email against being here tonight for exactly that reason, and we exchanged a couple of emails. In fact, you led it off. You said you wanted me to come precisely because, I'm not very interested in religion. Yeah, and I'm afraid that has probably shown, my naive and rough-edged views, I'm sure, have exposed that I haven't thought as much as I could have done about many of these matters, but I'm speaking as myself. So yes, I really do take the view that we should not worry too much about these points. And now coming back to the first one, Ruth Scott, I'm afraid I do have to disagree with you with great respect that although superficially these are different types of language, I don't think they're addressing different issues. I mean, certainly if you take one little bit of science, then you can say, well, that's just addressing a fruit fly's legs or something, what's it to me? But as soon as you get into larger things, and I've been projected, and this is where the genome background I have has been very important, I sort of, through that, got projected into the involvement of science in society, and what did it mean for people, and also how we handle the data, all sorts of things. I felt that actually these are the big issues that religious narrative and scientific narrative are both addressing these in the end, although they may have their own mechanisms on the way. And so I don't think we should separate them out. And the point, yes, well, the point about the secular literature, I mean, just to, once again, to emphasize my own sense of excitement, although I do read science fiction and Shakespeare and whatnot with great pleasure at times, I'm so excited by what's happening, by what we're finding out. You know, fact is stranger than fiction in the end. And this journey I talk about, I really want that to be conveyed to everybody, that life doesn't finish with our death, not because I think there's an afterlife, but because humanity is going to live on. And that to me is the excitement, and we all contribute to that journey.
Thank you. And can you make Lois feel she has any worth in her life at all, in terms of her commitment to study the subject? I hope I'm not over-exaggerating.
I think it's like English literature, literary criticism, whatever. It's an absolutely respectable thing and fun.
Andrew, your comments on the questions or on what John has said?
I've lost my place in my notes, I'm sorry. I mean, to some extent, Lois, I'm in the same boat as you. I mean, I write about this stuff and I get paid for it, so I naturally want it to be significant. But surely it does, the fact that John is able to come here and say all these things without, as far as he can tell, any reference to anything that he would recognize as religion, because I do see that my definition is itself a significant and interesting thing about our society, which is worth thinking about, because I think it's, to the most people, whether religious or not, are not theologians. They're lousy at theology, and the worst way to understand people's beliefs is by asking them to codify them. They're not coherent that way. So the sort of official philosophy of humanism seems to me pretty much nonsense. I'll take the sort of atheist bit, but the fact that British Humanist Association wants to go and be represented at the cenotaph, well, that says to me, this is another religious grouping. You know, you're not getting beyond religion, you're replacing it with a possibly slightly better variation. But the fact that somebody can actually live such a useful and admirable life as John does, while discarding Christianity, now that's interesting. That's interesting in the same way as Charles was interested in the fact that there are useful and valuable evangelical Christians whose beliefs put as theology are ludicrous.
Okay. Another round. I looked at this tiny group in the corner and I missed others. Gentleman there with glasses. Lady at the back. This gentleman here, that's right, just right there. Then the lady at the back. Is there another one? No, you're looking. Oh, you wanted to ask a question? Okay, fine, you can be third. You first.
I'm Martin Howarth. I'm retired head of Wallington County Grammar. My background is theology. I very much respect your scientific work, and I do respect your personal religious or non-theistic views. But the one was sorted out when you were 17, really, whereas the other developed very considerably as you did all your eminent research. Do you really think that it would only be possible to hold your particular religious non-theistic beliefs, given your eminent background, such that everybody who had that scientific background would necessarily share your personal religious, non-religious beliefs? Or put it the other way, that if you happen, for other reasons, your experiences have been different, to be a Christian or to have religious views, don't you think that you could have developed a theology which embraced and took account of your eminent scientific work?
Okay, the lady at the back there, right at the middle at the back. Thank you. There. Right down the middle there. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm a student of social anthropology at University of London. And previously we were talking about how religion is a very social thing that brings people together. And also you were saying previously about how we would get to the same place even without religion, how we would proceed relatively the same way. And but when you think of religion as a very social thing, it brings people together, therefore you also share and exchange knowledge. So do you think that without religion, as thinking of it as a very social thing, we would proceed to the same position as we are now, at the same rate, at the same speed?
Thank you. Gentleman there.
Okay, I'm Alistair. I've just come down from Lancaster. I'm just here literally for the debate, for the 3 hours. You'll forgive any crudeness in my question. I've just thought it up in my head right now. But anyway, as you know, we are hunter-gatherers. We are made up in that sense. We've changed very little over the past 50,000 years. I think I read somewhere. Changed very little genetically over the past 50,000 years. However, our technological advancement we've seen over the past 200-300 years has been light years ahead of anything what we've achieved in the past 100,000 years, or however long the human species, Homo sapiens, have existed for. Do you feel, I think this is directed at John, do you feel in any sense that we would need to modify our makeup to keep up with this technological advancements, or the continued of this rapid technological advancement?
Thank you. John.
If my experiences were different, couldn't I have developed a theology to suit my scientific work? Well, all I can do is to look at colleagues, and I certainly have colleagues who have faith, beliefs of one kind or another. It's not very common, actually. One of the reasons I've led a rather easy life in a way, because in biology these days, possibly because of the sorts of things we're dealing with, there aren't that many believers. There are a few. When you go to the outer fringes of physics, you tend to find more believers. I always feel that's because out there they're touching the void, and you sort of get propelled into various kinds of spiritual belief, which in order to survive. But in biology, we have our feet nowadays extremely firmly on the ground. Now we've got hold of the nuts and bolts of life, and we're very busy sorting it all out. Doesn't mean we understand everything, but we sort of sense that we're there until we get to, as I say, to the mental boundary, which is going to be tricky, and it's not just biology anyway. I suppose the trouble is, what can you say about that? I mean, if I am me, and I've actually now in total, spent some 40, 50 years thinking about the things we're talking about tonight. And I have picked them up and looked at them from every point of view and worried about them. And I've worried about all the issues we're discussing, about how things could be if people did and didn't have religious belief of various kinds. So I suspect there's probably convergence that my own particular thought processes have led to, and we've touched on one or two of the reasons to do with the multiple gods and that kind of thing. The anthropological question is could we have managed without it? No, I mean, clearly religion was selected for, along with the golden rule. I mean, I was simply going back to first points when I talk about the golden rule. I mean, I think that's very clear that would have existed in the small hunter-gatherer groups, absolutely essential. And then it was given this form of religion, and religious societies were rather successful. It gave them, they were actually extremely unequal very often. I think as religion it extended, you had the priests of Egypt and whatnot, and so on. And these were very powerful, successful societies, and you can see the solidarity coming through with the organisation of religion, and so it's exactly then we go immediately to the third point, that we have the technical advantage recently have been huge. Yes, not quite as huge as we imagine in some ways, but they're very, very big. But the understanding, which we've touched on 2 examples of, and there are many others, are even huger and have challenged, the established church, a number of points, established churches. Now, you say, do we need to modify our makeup? Are you referring to the notion that some of my colleagues at Manchester about human enhancement, that we actually need to change ourselves biologically? No. I personally am sceptical about those views. It's simply on grounds of practicality. I mean, we may, in fact, enhance ourselves in due course, but an awful lot of this is wishful thinking at the moment because we don't understand enough. And I'm extremely nervous about the idea of doing that until we understand more. And in fact, we have lots of laws against modifying people's genetic makeup for a very good reason. Personally, and this is really a naive position, but I look to the answers look for the answers to sociology and social structure. I think we are already extremely powerful animals. It's not going to be terribly easy to improve ourselves individually, but I think collectively we have an awful lot to learn, and that's exactly what we're discussing. And I'm perfectly happy at the notion that religion could be part of it. It's just that I don't think the evidence is very strongly in that religion of the God-fearing kind is helpful, although the broader sense which is being used here of some sort of social structure, of course, is. And that's exactly where we need to make progress, in my opinion.
Andrew?
Well, I was going to jump on what you said about organised religion contributing to inequality. I mean, because I think that the development from it's really agriculture. It's not religion. It's once you've got the surpluses, you get the inequality, and then religion becomes the way this is expressed and dramatised. And there's quite a lot of good research on this, because you can go to societies like pre-contact Hawaii, which were just in the middle of turning into a really nasty, religiously sanctioned dictatorship when Captain Cook turned up. But it didn't start with theology. I mean, the awful God is an explanation and a dramatization of the social conditions where the king can have you killed if he feels like it. Mm-hmm. But we come back to this idea of how do you limit Bill Gates, you see? What is it that could have stopped him, if not the idea that society as a whole is responsible for some ideal or some figure who will punish you if you step out of line? I mean, you can mark quite carefully the moment when social democracy fell over was when people discovered they could be really, really rich and nobody punished them.
Okay, on that light note, I think we're just almost at the end, not completely, so I'm going to say if there's a couple of quick questions, I'll take those, but we are really almost at the very end. We've got a whole row here. Okay, so can you bring the mic down? These 3, but very short questions. Very short questions.
Hello, Rosemary Summerfield. Just 3 very small questions for you.
We've got 9 questions already.
Could you mention some of your transcendent thinkers that have been able to influence a lot of people? Also, I am not familiar with any atheist soup kitchens, and I agree with your point about the work that's done by faith communities, because they believe in serving one another, sometimes not having power over one another. And I don't know how you would achieve more collective behaviour. When we had that, we had the USSR, and it wasn't that successful.
And the guy on your left, yeah.
I think I'll leave mine, actually. It's rather long.
You sure?
My name is Claire O'Brien, and I'm a religious studies and philosophy teacher in South London. I was just wondering if you were aware of Sam Harris, the neuroscientist's work, who argues that science can reveal moral truths based on empirical evidence on human suffering. So it kind of moves us to behave in a moral way if it increases human happiness and decreases human suffering. I was wondering if you were aware of it, and if you were, if you thought it was convincing.
Okay, final answer. Can I ask you both to respond to the conversation, both of you, and make any general winding up remarks that you'd like to make?
Well, immediately on Sam Harris, I would say that he also believed in one of his earlier books that you could scientifically justify the use of torture. as far as I'm concerned, this is an example where religion is superior. As to sum up the whole discussion, I'm just really glad that John came here and spoke so freely and forcefully, because the purpose of these interviews is not really to have a debate, but to bring out different ways in which people think about the things which have been traditionally questions that religion solved. And I don't think we could have had a better, clearer or more persuasive thinker from his corner than John, and thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Science revealing moral truths. I mean, I think what science does is to set the stage and to open up vistas for us to think about. The human genome is a very good example of that, where we know now the basic set of instructions to make us. We still don't know very much about how it all works, and but all it does is to make a baby, and then the baby learns and so on. So moral truths are a product of our nature and our nurture and our experiences and our social experiences, and it really comes back to the beginning about how we have to have these basic moral truths in order to survive. But the thing is, we should also celebrate them, because this gives us power. I mean, what's holding us back is the individualist kicking against any constraints on them, and that's coming back to why do people get filthy rich and cause trouble and all the rest of it. So if we can see it, and so now the question then, this is not about special people who are transcendent thinkers. The point is, this is us. We are transcendent thinkers. We can sit here, any one of us, and think about what happened yesterday, or think about what might happen next year, and make plans, and then we can do it collectively. That's all I mean. Sorry? Everybody does it. No, everybody does it. They can't get up in the morning without doing that. All I mean is that we can imagine and plan outside. Now, of course, we celebrate people who think further and are able to put across what they've discovered, yes. But the point is, we are denigrating ourselves and one another if we don't accept that we are participating in this process. And this is what society should really be about. It's not about superior people. It's really been my whole thrust, with religion, is I do not want this idea of superior beings, and I don't want superior people either, except in a first among equals leadership kind of way. So I think, I'm not, it's not that transcendent thinkers are a special category on their own. The Atheist Soup Kitchen, well, I don't know, I don't think Oxfam is an especially religious organization, but there you go. And the USSR, look, come on. I mean, Russia has had a whole series of cruel regimes. That's the way Russia operates. Whether it will change, I don't know. It was particularly nasty, but I don't know that it has a great deal to do with atheism or theism or anything else. I think it's just what happened in the USSR. I think it's very sad that experiment didn't work and sort of got hijacked by people who not only denied God, but denied science, the whole Lysenko affair and so on. It was a disaster. But that's what happens, not if you have religion or not religion. It's about what happens if you have oligarchies or dictatorships. And I think we should bear in mind, if I may just say, that we have one of those in the West now, which is the power of the corporation, the power of advertising, which we have not touched on, but much more than any other sort of feature in our society is driving us to destruction. It's the idea that we have to grow, we have to spend more, we have to shop more, we're using resources more. We are on a treadmill which is dangerous, and this is at the moment the only way we know to compete, and we have to get out of it. So that too is a false doctrine, quite as bad actually as far as the globe's concerned as the USSR was.
What a tremendous ending. Optimistic to send us home with a spring in our step. I really, really want to thank, first of all, you, John. I think that you've been admirable and clear and challenging and direct in a way which is precisely what we hope these interviews will draw out. You'll see there are a number of people here who don't agree exactly with what you say, but that's not the point. The point is to challenge and go through and to discuss. No, of course. And I want to thank you, Andrew, in the way that you drew some of that out of John from your questions at the beginning. It was really tremendous, and thank you very much indeed, as well as for your own direct answers to the questions which have been raised. And I want to thank all of you very much for coming. As I said at the beginning, this is very much an experiment, this idea of the Westminster Faith Interviews, but I'm going to unilaterally declare it a success so far on the evidence of this evening. The next one is in a fortnight's time with Shirley Williams, and I hope you'll consider attending those too. The details are on the website, where you've probably already got most of your information. Peter, are we actually offering wine this evening? Here is the wine woman at the back, is a terribly nice woman, and to any of you who ask nicely, she will give you some wine and some good advice on life. It's tremendous. So you're very, very welcome to come and join us for a glass of wine at the end, and thank you very much indeed for coming again this evening.